I was 2 weeks away from becoming a multimillionaire when my keycard stopped working. It was a Wednesday morning. I remember that because the weather in Chicago was that stubborn kind of gray. It wasn't raining, but everything felt wet. I parked in my usual spot in the Medcore garage. Same spot I'd pulled into for the last 9 years, badge in hand, coffee in the cup holder, heart full of that twitchy mix of stress and pride that only founders understand. When I tapped my card at the side entrance and the red light blinked back at me, I thought the reader was just being buggy again. It had done that a few times before. I tapped it again. Nothing. A third time. Still locked. My stomach dropped. I tried laughing it off as I walked around to the front. Maybe they're upgrading the system, I muttered to myself. But I already knew something was off. You don't get locked out of your own company 2 weeks before a $400 million acquisition unless someone, somewhere, has decided you're no longer part of the plan. I should back up for a second. My name's Lucas Grant. I'm 42, or I was when this all started. I'm a software engineer by trade, and I co-founded Medcore, a medical tech startup specializing in AI diagnostic software, back when I was still coding from a hand-me-down IKEA desk and living off ramen and cheap beer. For most of my adult life, Medcore was my life. The company was my baby. I wrote the first 10,000 lines of code myself. I hired our first engineers, pitched to investors, stayed up for 72-hour code sprints before demos. I even slept in the office more times than I'd like to admit. I didn't do it for glory. I did it because I believed in what we were building. We were helping doctors save lives. How could I not give it everything? And the payoff? It was finally coming. After nearly a decade, we had an acquisition deal on the table. A big one. For $100 million. My stake, 2.5%, was worth $10 million. Or at least, it was. Until that morning. I finally got inside after texting Megan at the front desk. She looked confused when she saw me waiting. "Hey, Lucas. I thought you were working remote today." "Nope," I said, trying to sound casual. "Figured I'd come in and knock out the onboarding updates for the transfer. You know, tie up loose ends." She gave me a polite smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. The elevator ride up to the 7th floor felt longer than usual. The office was quieter than normal too. It was still early, but something about it felt tense. Like walking into a house after a fight. Everyone's pretending things are fine, but the air's thick with something unspoken. When I got to my desk, my laptop was gone. Just an empty spot. No charger. No monitor. Not even the mouse pad I bought with my own money that said code hard or go home. I looked around. A few of the engineers glanced at me, then quickly turned back to their screens. "Hey, where's my..." I started, but before I could finish, I saw Tom Willis walking toward me. Tom, head of HR, smug smile. Power haircut. The kind of guy who always wore a company fleece even when it was 80 degrees out. "Lucas," he said, clasping his hands together like he was about to offer me a Groupon coupon for grief counseling. "Can we chat in the glass room?" He didn't wait for an answer. He just walked. Inside the fishbowl, as we called it, the fully transparent glass conference room meant to signal openness, but really just made firing people a public spectacle. Tom slid a sealed envelope across the table. Rebecca Langston, the CEO we'd brought in 2 years ago, wasn't there. She never showed up for the dirty work. She had vision, not responsibility. Tom began his speech. "After reviewing recent cultural alignment and performance metrics, the board has decided." "Cut the HR speak," I snapped, more out of shock than anger. "What is this?" He paused, dropped the script. "We're moving in a different direction. Effective immediately, your employment is terminated." No mention of the acquisition. No mention of my equity. Just a severance package that wouldn't cover a quarter of what I was owed. "But the deal," I started. Tom slid over a second piece of paper. A non-disparagement clause, with a fat 0 under additional compensation. I looked him in the eye. "You're cutting me out of the payout." He didn't answer. Just said, "Legal has reviewed everything." And just like that, I was done. 9 years. Hundreds of sleepless nights. A billion-dollar algorithm I'd helped create. And now, I was walking out the same glass doors I helped design, empty-handed. I didn't go home that night. I drove to the lake. Parked. Sat in the dark with nothing but the sound of waves and my phone screen lighting up with empty texts. "So sorry to hear. Let's catch up soon. WTF happened?" I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, numb, staring at my reflection in the window. And that's when I remembered something. A conversation from years ago. Late night. Pizza boxes stacked like Jenga on the conference room table. Me and my two co-founders going through the original incorporation paperwork line by line. I was the paranoid one. The one who insisted on clause after clause to protect us from dilution, termination without cause, and predatory investor moves. I remember printing it all out, signing it with a black Uniball pen that bled on my thumb. And I remembered something else. Page 92. There was something there. A clause. A buried line. Something about equity protection. Something they forgot. Or maybe they hoped I did. And that was their mistake. Because I hadn't forgotten. And I still had a copy. The thing people don't understand about startups is that in the early days, you're not building a company, you're surviving one. MedCore started in a 2-bedroom apartment just outside the University of Illinois. Back then, we called it MedSide, and our idea was simple. Create an algorithm that could flag anomalies in radiology scans faster than the human eye. It was ambitious, maybe even arrogant, but we were 28, broke, and stupid enough to think we could change the world. There were 3 of us, me, Jeremy Ng, and Dylan Roth. Jeremy was the math genius, Dylan was the slick-talking business brain, and I was the guy who wrote the code and made the coffee. We worked out of our living room, hacking together prototypes, surviving on energy drinks and microwave burritos, betting our 30s on a product we couldn't afford to finish. But we had something real. Our first pilot with a clinic in Evanston shaved diagnostic time by 28%. By the end of year 2, we were invited to pitch at a healthcare startup showcase in Austin. We didn't win, but we met a VC named Mark Linder, who introduced us to a syndicate of angels. I still remember the day the first investment check hit our account, $750,000. We stood in a Wendy's parking lot screaming like idiots, holding Frosties in the air like trophies. And that night, in the haze of relief and possibility, we sat down and drafted the very first MedCore Founders Agreement. It was Dylan who said it first. What if one of us gets kicked out later, after we've done the hard work? It was an honest fear. Dylan was always thinking 5 steps ahead, which is probably why he got out early, bought out quietly in year 4 when we brought in serious VC money. But I wasn't ready to leave. I was still building, still chasing the dream. I pushed hard for protections in that agreement. Vesting schedules, termination clauses, exit equity guarantees. Most of it was boilerplate, but there was one line I fought for and wouldn't budge on. Equity shares held by founding members shall not be subject to forfeiture except in the case of gross misconduct or fraud, as defined under Section 9. We called it the loyalty lock. Jeremy thought I was being paranoid. Dylan signed it with a smirk. And me? I printed 3 copies and filed one in a fireproof lockbox under my bed. That line, buried on page 92, was the only reason I wasn't drowning in rage right now. Because if that clause still held, they owed me my 2.5%. And if they tried to screw me out of it, they were in breach. And if they were in breach, the deal with Aravis Tech could implode. I spent the next day digging through a battered cardboard box in my basement. It smelled like old printer ink and regret. I hadn't touched it in years. Contracts, pitch decks, seed round term sheets. All the paper trail of the last decade, yellowed and dog-eared. And then I found it. A thick stack of stapled pages, highlighted and annotated in my awful handwriting. MedCore Founders Equity and Operating Agreement, version 1.4. Page 92 was still there. And so was the clause. Even better, all 3 of us had signed it. Jeremy, Dylan, and me. No amendments. No voids. No expiration language. They'd screwed up. Or maybe they thought I'd thrown it out. Most people don't keep a decade-old contract. Most people don't remember clauses on page 92. But I did. Because I was the kind of guy who stayed up until 3 a.m. proofreading NDAs and flagging typos in our privacy policy. I read the fine print because I wrote most of it. That night, I scanned every page, named each file, timestamped it, and emailed a copy to a lawyer I knew from a Y Combinator mixer 6 years ago. His reply came less than 12 hours later. This clause is enforceable, especially if they terminated you without cause. Want to chat? I didn't text anyone. I didn't scream online or threaten to go public. I just booked a coffee meeting with my lawyer, wore a plain shirt, and started preparing the quietest revenge of my life. Because this wasn't about a temper tantrum. This was chess. They'd moved first. Now it was my turn, and I had the board memorized. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. You don't bring in professional leadership unless someone's planning to push the founders out. And we brought in Rebecca Langston. On paper, she was everything investors drool over. Stanford MBA, ex-COO of a Fortune 500 health tech firm, perfect teeth, and a resume peppered with words like scaling, synergy, and exit ready. She wore heels that clicked like metronomes down the office hallways and had this uncanny way of smiling with her mouth, but never her eyes. The board said she was our next phase. I was still stupid enough to believe that meant she was joining us, not replacing us. The first sign was small. She started asking for reports I'd already been submitting for years. Things like infrastructure cost breakdowns, code efficiency ratios, dev team throughput metrics, numbers I could pull in my sleep. At first, I thought she just wanted to understand the stack better. Then she started copying our junior engineers on emails, CCing them on conversations that should have been private. A few weeks later, I was no longer invited to the Friday investor calls. Still, I convinced myself it was growing pains. Change was uncomfortable, right? That's what they always say. But it wasn't change. It was a strategy. She was building her team, and I wasn't on it. Then came Tom Willis. He was brought in as head of people ops, which is a fancy way of saying HR with a personality cult. I swear the guy spoke entirely in LinkedIn slogans. Let's pivot to a people-first mentality. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Let's circle back on that. At first, he acted friendly, called me chief, brought me cold brew on Fridays, said things like, "Just here to support you, Lucas. Rebecca and I are big fans." But every conversation with Tom had an undertone, like he was cataloging my reactions, testing boundaries. One time I joked during a team lunch that our dev cycles were fast because caffeine was cheaper than therapy. Everyone laughed. 2 days later, Tom pulled me aside and gently reminded me to model emotional safety in public spaces. That's when I stopped laughing. They started documenting me next. Late-night emails asking for status updates on things already in progress. Requests for written clarifications after meetings. Passive-aggressive questions like, "Can you confirm whether this code refactor was reviewed per SOP?" Followed by, "Let's ensure we follow proper protocol moving forward." I'd seen this before. This wasn't about performance. This was a paper trail. I still remember the day I realized it wasn't just paranoia. I was walking past a glass-walled meeting room, ironically, the same one Tom would fire me in months later, and saw Rebecca talking with 2 VCs and our legal advisor. They didn't see me at first, so I paused just outside, pretending to check my phone. One of the VCs was laughing. Rebecca said, "Well, let's just say he's not long-term leadership material." And just like that, I knew. She wasn't here to grow the company with me. She was here to grow the company around me. And eventually, without me, I started noticing other changes. Tom began scheduling weekly check-ins with the engineering team. Without me, my responsibilities were being quietly redistributed to mid-level managers. The product roadmap I designed was reimagined with Rebecca's new vision, which somehow involved more integrations, fewer core updates, and enough buzzwords to make a TED Talk blush. Then came the kicker. Rebecca offered me a strategic advisor role. You know what that is? It's Silicon Valley speak for "please go away without a lawsuit." I didn't take it. Not because I was prideful. I mean, okay, maybe a little. But mostly because something felt unfinished. Like the game wasn't over yet. Something in my gut told me there was more coming. And I was right. They weren't done cutting me out. They were going to make sure I didn't just lose my job. They were going to try and take everything I built. But they forgot who they were playing against. Because I wasn't just the code guy. I was the guy who built the foundation. The one who wrote the rules they thought they could rewrite. And deep in a drawer, I still had the rule book. It happened on a Monday. Of course it did. Corporate betrayal loves Mondays. Something about starting your week with quiet devastation must feel efficient to people like Rebecca and Tom. I walked into the office around 9:15, late for me, but I'd been up half the night stress-refreshing Aravis Tech's acquisition press releases, looking for signs of movement. The deal was closer than ever. The board had approved final terms. The integration teams were already prepping migration timelines. In 2 weeks, the company I'd helped build from nothing would be part of something much bigger. Medcore's future was secured. So was mine. Or so I thought. My name badge still worked that day. I wish it hadn't. The office felt off. People were quieter than usual. I saw glances, quick, uncomfortable ones, then sudden dives back into screens. A few forced smiles. That kind of tension you only feel when people know something you don't and wish they didn't. Then I got the calendar ping. Catch up with Tom and Rebecca. Glass room. 9:30 a.m. No agenda. No context. Just vibes. When I walked in, Tom was already seated. Rebecca stood by the window, arms crossed, her blazer buttoned like she was preparing for a courtroom drama. She turned just enough to smile, like a shark easing into a shallow pool. "Lucas," she said brightly, "thanks for making the time." As if I had a choice, I said, trying to keep it light. Tom gestured to the seat across from him. "Let's keep this brief." That's when I noticed the 2 envelopes on the table. White, unlabeled, one thicker than the other. My gut dropped before my brain caught up. Rebecca folded her arms. "Effective today, we're sunsetting your role as CTO." I didn't say anything. Because what do you even say to that? 9 years, billions of lines of code, every product, pitch, and prototype built on my back. And they were calling it a sunset. Tom slid the thicker envelope forward. "This contains a severance agreement, a release form, and your offboarding checklist." "No discussion?" I asked. "We've already had several," Rebecca said. "This is simply a formalization." I opened the envelope. Pages of legal boilerplate. No mention of equity. No breakdown of payout. Just the kind of paperwork designed to make you go numb and sign fast. I looked up at Rebecca. "And my 2.5%? She didn't flinch. "As per the revised vesting terms under Board Resolution 211, your equity has been converted into Class C stock. Non-voting, non-liquid. It will be returned to the pool upon your exit." I stared at her. "You can't do that. It's already been done." It was so quiet in the room I could hear the AC cycling. I felt heat crawling up my neck, not from rage, but from this hollow, echoing sense of disbelief. This couldn't be real. There had to be some mistake, some misread line, some clause. Page 92. My mind snapped to it like a reflex. They thought they buried me in paperwork, but I buried a clause first. Tom pushed the second envelope toward me. "Thinner. This is your NDA and non-disparagement agreement. We need it signed before COB today." I didn't touch it. Rebecca sighed. "Lucas, I know this is emotional." "No," I cut in. "You know what's emotional? Staying up 47 hours straight to fix a bug that would have tanked our FDA approval deadline. You know what's emotional? Letting your best friend take a buyout so you could stay and make this work. What you're doing right now, that's not emotional. That's calculated." Rebecca blinked. Just once, then recovered. "We're not trying to hurt you," she said. That was the moment I realized she believed that. She'd rationalized it, framed it as what's best for the company. For her company, not mine anymore. I didn't yell, didn't flip the table, didn't storm out. Instead, I stood, folded both envelopes neatly, and placed them back on the table. "I'll have my lawyer review this." Tom's eyes twitched. "Lucas, we really prefer to keep this in-house." "Then you shouldn't have sent me out the door," I said quietly. And I left. No dramatic farewell. No slow clap from the engineers. Just the sound of my shoes across the tile and the soft click of the door behind me. I drove straight to my lawyer's office. It was a small firm, nothing flashy, but Aaron Park knew contracts like a priest knew scripture. When I handed him the original founder agreement and pointed to page 92, he whistled under his breath. Did they seriously forget this was still active? Apparently. He leaned back in his chair, smiling like a man who'd just found a typo in the devil's signature. "Well, Lucas, it looks like they just lit their deal on fire." That night, I didn't sleep, but not because I was panicking. I was planning, because now I knew what they'd done, and more importantly, I knew what they didn't know. The thing about being stabbed in the back is, it only works if you don't see the knife coming. But I saw this one. Not at first, not clearly, but somewhere, deep in my gut, I'd known they were circling for weeks. And that instinct, that's what made me scan every dusty file in my basement the second I got home. That's how I found page 92. Aaron, my lawyer, read it 3 times before saying anything. We were sitting in a cramped, windowless conference room in his office the morning after I'd been cut loose. The walls were yellowed, the lights were humming faintly, and the only thing that smelled fresher than the coffee was the blood in the water. He leaned back in his chair, flipping between the original founder agreement and the newer, revised equity documents they tried to bury me with. "Lucas," he said, tapping the clause with his pen, "you realize this is a kill switch, right?" "I do now." It was a simple sentence. One line buried in legalese, between indemnification clauses and tax provisions. In the event of involuntary separation not involving documented cause as defined under Section 9, all founding equity shall remain vested and unretractable, irrespective of internal board action or reclassification. In normal English, unless they could prove I committed fraud, sexual harassment, embezzlement, or something equally nuclear, they couldn't take my shares. They could reclassify me. They could fire me. They could walk me out of the office. But they couldn't erase me. At least, not legally. "What's the play here?" I asked. Aaron smiled. Not the warm kind. The kind you smile right before flipping over 4 aces at a poker table. "We don't go after them," he said. "We go after the acquisition." I blinked. "You mean Aravis? They don't want a lawsuit. They don't want noise. They don't want delayed due diligence. And they especially don't want to discover that 2.5% of what they're buying is in legal limbo." He closed the folder with a satisfying snap. "They want a clean deal. We show them this isn't clean." I hadn't spoken to anyone from MedCorp since the termination. No texts, no calls. Not even Jeremy, my old co-founder, who had left years ago but still held a minor advisor role on the cap table. Everyone had gone radio silent, but Aravis hadn't. They were still doing background checks, quietly vetting key team members, crawling through contracts. They didn't know I'd been axed yet, so we reached out. Not to the CEO, not to their legal team, to the acquisition council, the ones responsible for cleaning the transaction before signing. Aaron sent a short, devastating email. Attached is documentation suggesting the unlawful removal of a founding partner and attempted forfeiture of protected equity. The clause in question, Section 14.6, page 92, predates any board reclassification and was signed by all founding parties. Unless we resolve this matter, we are prepared to file an injunction and alert the acquiring party to the potential litigation risk. I didn't breathe for 3 hours after he hit send. When the response came, it was 5 words. "Can we speak this afternoon?" The call was short, surgical. Aravis was polite. They were also pissed, just not at me. They'd already earmarked my equity for the deal. They'd done their math assuming I was on board. When they found out I wasn't even with the company anymore, let's just say frustrated was putting it lightly. And once we showed them the original agreement, with all 3 founder signatures still legible and unchallenged, they realized something very expensive had just been overlooked. "If this clause holds," one of their lawyers said, "and you're not included in the equity payout, it could delay the entire transaction. Or worse, nullify it." Exactly what I wanted to hear. The next day, Rebecca emailed me. "Lucas, let's not escalate this further. I think there's a way we can resolve this that works for everyone. No apology, no admission of wrongdoing, just damage control." I didn't respond. Aaron did. "We'll consider resolution upon reinstatement of the original equity agreement and financial compensation for breach." She didn't reply for 2 days. Then came a flurry of calls. From MedCorp's legal team, from Tom, even a voicemail from Jeremy, finally breaking the silence. "Hey, man, this thing's blowing up fast. You good?" I didn't call him back, because I wasn't good. Not yet, but I was in control. And for the first time in weeks, they weren't. Late that night, I opened the scanned contract again. I stared at that line on page 92 until the letters blurred. It hit me, not just how close I'd come to losing everything, but how many people probably have. People who don't keep their contracts. People who trust their leadership. People who sign NDAs just to walk away clean. That wasn't going to be me. Not this time. This wasn't over. They tried to bury me under paper, but I had the one page that mattered. And now, it was their turn to squirm. They didn't expect me to read it. That was the whole game. Bury it deep. Mask it in enough legal fog that no one without a JD and a grudge would ever catch it. But I caught it. Page 92 wasn't just a sentence. It was a loaded gun hidden under the table, and they were too arrogant to check if it was still there. And now it was pointed at them. 3 days after Aravis got involved, everything started unraveling. I wasn't in the room, obviously, but Aaron had ears everywhere. One of his old classmates worked tangentially with Aravis's compliance counsel. He'd called Aaron that morning with a single sentence. Your guy just nuked their timeline. Apparently, MedCorp had failed to disclose my termination during pre-close reporting. That alone was a huge red flag. Add in a potential lawsuit tied directly to unreleased equity, and Aravis's legal team slammed the brakes. Due diligence was paused. The board was called into an emergency weekend meeting. HR scrambled to correct inconsistencies. And suddenly, I wasn't the problem anymore. I was the variable they hadn't accounted for. Rebecca called me herself that Sunday. Blocked number. I almost didn't answer. Lucas, she started, voice a little too calm. This situation has gone further than anyone intended. I stayed quiet. She kept talking. The deal is fragile. We're all under pressure. I think it would be in everyone's best interest to find a middle ground. You're offering a settlement, I said flatly. A compromise. I pictured her pacing in her condo, probably sipping from a $90 glass of Napa Red while trying not to sound like she was sweating bullets. What's the number? 2 million. I laughed. I didn't mean to. It just came out. A tired, quiet, you've got to be kidding me kind of laugh. Rebecca, I said, that clause is enforceable. My stake is worth 10. Her silence was deafening. Okay, she finally said. But you and I both know they're not going to wait forever. If this gets uglier, everyone loses. Everyone, I repeated. And I let that hang, because she knew what I meant. If Aravis pulled out entirely, which they were threatening to do if the equity issue wasn't resolved, MedCorp would take the hit. Not just the board, the employees, the engineers, the junior staff still clinging to their stock options like lifeboats. This wasn't just about me anymore. But that wasn't my fault. That was her decision. Aaron drafted a counter. Full reinstatement of my equity. Back pay on missed bonuses. A written acknowledgement of the breach, sealed under mutual confidentiality. And a clause of my own. I would be paid out before the deal closed. Not during. Not after. Before. Because I wasn't going to trust them with a damn thing ever again. It took them 5 days to agree. They tried to haggle. Threaten. Guilt trip. One board member even emailed me personally, telling me I was putting dozens of careers in jeopardy over a paperwork technicality. I didn't reply, but I wanted to say this. You fired me. You erased me. And now that I remember what you forgot, I'm not backing down. The wire transfer came through on a Thursday morning. $10.2 million. The .2 was interest, apparently. I stared at the number on my phone screen for a long time. Then I got up, made a pot of coffee, and sat quietly in my kitchen as the sun came through the blinds. I didn't cheer. I didn't dance. I just breathed. Because it wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about being seen. About being remembered. About the system thinking it could steamroll me, and learning that sometimes the code guy reads the contracts too. The deal closed 6 days later. Aravis bought MedCorp for $390 million. $10 million less than the original offer. Funny that. Tom resigned shortly after. Rebecca stayed on as CEO until Q3 earnings dipped and investor confidence faltered. By winter, she was pursuing new opportunities. As for me, I walked away. No LinkedIn post. No press interview. No revenge party on a yacht. Just silence. The same silence they used to try and erase me. Only this time, I owned it. You ever watch someone realize, in real time, that they underestimated you? It's a special kind of silence. Not the awkward kind, or the tense kind. It's the kind where they suddenly remember every moment they dismissed you, every email they skimmed, every idea they hijacked, and you can feel the panic behind their polite little smile as they realize. You didn't just survive. You kept the receipts. And now you've lawyered up. Aaron wasn't flashy. He didn't wear expensive suits or talk over people. He was quiet, methodical, and precise. The kind of guy who didn't threaten, he informed. And when he informed Rebecca's legal team that I had no interest in returning to the company and instead wanted to be made whole, the reaction wasn't fury. It was fear, not because of who I was, but because of what I knew and what I still had the legal right to do with it. See, the clause on page 92 wasn't just a minor technicality. It was a live wire running directly through the spine of the acquisition. That clause meant that, unless they paid me what I was owed, they were in breach of original corporate bylaws, which meant Aravis Tech could delay the acquisition, demand a renegotiated price, or walk away entirely. And in mergers like this, time kills deals. Rebecca and the board had bet on my silence, that I'd walk away hurt, humiliated, maybe even ashamed. But I didn't walk away. I waited. And when the timing was perfect, I pulled the pin. Aaron played it flawlessly. No grandstanding. No viral lawsuit. Just clean, surgical pressure. He didn't email their CEO. He emailed their general counsel, the lawyer on the hook if this exploded. He didn't talk about feelings. He sent over contract scans, digital timestamps, and signed copies. He didn't threaten to go public. He simply explained that, unless my original shares were honored and liquidated in the deal, we would file a motion to delay the acquisition until legal ownership of all equity was clarified. And we copied Aravis on every email. That was the real kill shot. 2 days later, Aravis's senior M&A advisor personally requested a call. Aaron looped me in, but did most of the talking. I just listened, sipping cold coffee while they scrambled to contain the fire. We weren't aware of this clause. There seems to be a discrepancy in what was disclosed. This creates liability we're not comfortable inheriting. No anger, just legal panic. The kind that means someone's boss is asking really uncomfortable questions. Aaron just calmly replied, "We're open to resolution, but only if Mr. Grant's shares are treated as originally agreed." That's when they caved. They tried to throw in some conditions at the last second. A gag order, a non-disparagement clause, a 2-year consulting agreement with strict terms. Aaron shot every one of them down. "You're not hiring Mr. Grant. You're paying him what you owe. That's it." In the end, I got every penny of my $10.2 million. But that wasn't the win. The win was hearing the Aravis attorney say, after signing the final agreement, "You know, if we'd known all this up front, we probably would have offered you a board seat." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Because that sentence, that was the sound of the knife turning. In the weeks after the deal closed, I started getting messages. From old teammates. From junior devs who said things like, "I heard what really happened. You didn't deserve that." From engineers still at MedCore asking for references, some quietly hoping to get out. Even Jeremy called. We hadn't spoken in years. Not since he sold his shares and moved to Colorado. But he'd heard about the clause. The payout. The way I handled it. "I gotta say, man, you did it clean." "Didn't feel clean," I said. He paused. "That's how you know it was the right kind of revenge. It's weird, having power and not needing to use all of it. I could have scorched the earth, gone public, written a takedown blog post that would have set Reddit on fire and tanked MedCore's Glassdoor ratings for a decade. But I didn't, because this wasn't about drama. It was about dignity. They made noise trying to erase me. I answered with silence that made them pay attention. And honestly, that was louder than anything I could have said. The final blow didn't come with shouting or broken glass. It came in a perfectly lit conference room on the 23rd floor of an office building overlooking Lake Michigan. Hardwood table, bottled water, neutral-colored chairs so bland they had to have been picked by a corporate therapist. The acquisition signing. Everyone was all smiles. Everyone but me. Technically, I wasn't even supposed to be there. I wasn't on the board anymore. Wasn't in the leadership lineup Aravis had publicly acknowledged. But my name was on the cap table now, fully restored, and the payout couldn't be finalized without my signature on a closing document they thought they'd never need to see again. Funny that. So I showed up in a gray suit, sat down like a ghost from the company's past, and made eye contact with every single person who voted to remove me. Tom. He wouldn't look up, just stared at his phone like it might save him from a room that was suddenly too small. Rebecca? She smiled. The tight, stretched kind of smile you give when you're clenching your jaw behind your molars. The Aravis team was all business. I didn't blame them. This had become messier than they liked. But now that the deal was salvaged, everyone wanted it over. Especially the people who had tried to erase me. A junior legal associate passed around the closing packet. I could feel the air tighten as mine slid in front of me. $10 million. 2.5%. Signed, sealed, and now sitting in my hands. The room waited for me to sign. Even the HVAC felt like it paused. I looked over at Rebecca. I read this one, I said quietly. All the way to the end. I signed. And in that moment, no one cheered. Because they all knew what had just happened. I hadn't just been paid. I'd won. After the paperwork, there was a catered lunch. Chicken skewers, safe wine, boring conversation. I didn't stay. As I left, I passed Tom in the hallway. He gave me a weak nod and said, "No hard feelings, right?" I stopped. I turned to him, met his eyes, and said the truest thing I'd said all year. "I don't need hard feelings, Tom. I have receipts." He looked like he wanted to say something else, but I walked away. Outside, the sun was glaring off the glass towers like spotlights on an empty stage. I stepped into the street, the city buzzing around me, my phone buzzing in my pocket with transfer confirmation notifications. $10.2 million. But that wasn't the real payout. The real payout was that they had to see me win. They had to sign off on it. They had to live with it. Some people think revenge is about shouting, lawsuits, or public takedowns. But the best revenge is letting them dig their own grave, handing them a pen instead of a shovel, and making sure your name is on the final page. I thought it would feel better. After all that, after the betrayals, the boardroom backstabbing, the clawing my way back into the deal they tried to bury me under, I thought I'd feel something sharper, louder, like triumph with teeth. Instead, I just felt still, not empty, not numb, just quiet, like I'd finally stepped outside a room where someone had been yelling for years and only just noticed how peaceful it was without the noise. The day the wire cleared, I didn't celebrate. I didn't post anything on social media. No new chapter caption. No cryptic quotes about karma. I didn't go buy a Tesla or fly to Tulum. I just walked my dog around the block. Same route. Same hoodie. Same neighbor who never makes eye contact, but always waves. That night, I sat on the couch with a beer I didn't even finish and rewatched The Social Network for the 100th time. Not for Zuckerberg. For Eduardo. The guy who got blindsided, gutted, and written out until the end. Except this time, I wasn't the guy staring at a laptop, refreshing a page hoping for closure. I was the one who walked away with the shares intact. You know what's weird? Winning quietly doesn't make the wound disappear. You still remember what it felt like to walk into that glass room and see two envelopes sitting on the table. You still remember the first time you realized your team had slowly started meeting without you. You still wake up sometimes, mid-dream, checking an inbox you don't have access to anymore. Even with the payout, even with the vindication, even with the lawyers telling you, you did everything right. There's still a scar, but it's clean, and that's something. A week after the deal closed, I got an email from one of our junior engineers. Fresh out of grad school. Smart kid. He'd always asked too many questions, the kind most companies pretend to like until they stop being convenient. His message was simple. I heard what happened. Just wanted to say thank you for standing your ground. For reminding us the fine print matters. That hit harder than the check. Because that's what this was, really. Not just revenge. Not just clawing back what was mine. It was a reminder, to myself, and maybe to others, that quiet doesn't mean weak. That silence can be strategic. That sometimes the best move isn't to shout, it's to outlast. I talked to Aaron about it a week later. What now? He asked over coffee. Don't know yet, I said. Not in a rush to jump into anything. You ever think about starting something new? I smiled. Maybe. Not for revenge. Not to prove anything. But because I finally had room to build something where I wouldn't have to check over my shoulder every 5 minutes. A place where I own my work, and no one could rewrite my name off the ledger. Revenge stories always make the ending look explosive. Like there's a single moment when you win, and the credits roll. But in real life, winning quietly means no one applauds, but you finally stop fighting. And sometimes, peace is the loudest victory of all. I thought it would feel better. After all that, after the betrayals, the boardroom backstabbing, the clawing my way back into the deal they tried to bury me under, I thought I'd feel something sharper, louder, like triumph with teeth. Instead, I just felt still. Not empty, not numb, just quiet. Like I'd finally stepped outside a room where someone had been yelling for years and only just noticed how peaceful it was without the noise. The day the wire cleared, I didn't celebrate. I didn't post anything on social media. No new chapter caption. No cryptic quotes about karma. I didn't go buy a Tesla or fly to Tulum. I just walked my dog around the block. Same route, same hoodie, same neighbor who never makes eye contact, but always waves. That night, I sat on the couch with a beer I didn't even finish and rewatched The Social Network for the 100th time. Not for Zuckerberg, for Eduardo, the guy who got blindsided, gutted, and written out until the end. Except this time, I wasn't the guy staring at a laptop, refreshing a page hoping for closure. I was the one who walked away with the shares intact. You know what's weird? Winning quietly doesn't make the wound disappear. You still remember what it felt like to walk into that glass room and see 2 envelopes sitting on the table. You still remember the first time you realized your team had slowly started meeting without you. You still wake up sometimes, mid-dream, checking an inbox you don't have access to anymore. Even with the payout, even with the vindication, even with the lawyers telling you, you did everything right. There's still a scar, but it's clean, and that's something. A week after the deal closed, I got an email from one of our junior engineers. Fresh out of grad school. Smart kid. He'd always asked too many questions, the kind most companies pretend to like until they stop being convenient. His message was simple. I heard what happened. Just wanted to say thank you for standing your ground, for reminding us the fine print matters. That hit harder than the check, because that's what this was, really. Not just revenge, not just clawing back what was mine. It was a reminder, to myself, and maybe to others, that quiet doesn't mean weak. That silence can be strategic. That sometimes the best move isn't to shout, it's to outlast. I talked to Aaron about it a week later. What now? He asked over coffee. Don't know yet, I said, not in a rush to jump into anything. You ever think about starting something new? I smiled. Maybe. Not for revenge. Not to prove anything. But because I finally had room to build something where I wouldn't have to check over my shoulder every 5 minutes. A place where I own my work, and no one could rewrite my name off the ledger. Revenge stories always make the ending look explosive. Like there's a single moment when you win and the credits roll. But in real life, winning quietly means no one applauds, but you finally stop fighting. And sometimes, peace is the loudest victory of all.